Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov's chess channel and welcome back to our London system series. So in this series we're following this very nice opening from White's perspective, and today we're continuing with the London system against the King's Indian defense. I think the King's Indian is a very popular opening, especially for beginners, because when I started to play chess I used to watch Hikaru Nakamura's games, Garry Kasparov's games, I don't know, Bobby Fischer, Mikhail Tal's games, and they played really the sharp openings of the King's Indian. Then I wanted to repeat that, and then I basically stuck to the King's Indian. And in this video I wanted to show really a great approach of White's, how to beat the King's Indian with the flexible setup, with the 150 attack approach. I think you can use the ideas of the 150 attack in order to beat the King's Indian. So let's check out what's all about. I'll explain you what I mean about this 150 attack ideas, because we're playing basically an accelerated London system with a flexible knight to c3 move. You can say there's nothing special with this move knight to c3, but actually it's, I think, one of the greatest ideas to beat the King's Indian with the London system setup. So let's check out what are the ideas of White and what are the ideas of Black. So we're playing, of course, d4, knight to f6, and now after bishop to f4, the accelerated London, now Black can go into g6 ideas, of course, going into King's Indian structures with bishop to g7, d6, then maybe, I don't know, knight to d7 and e5 and similar ideas. So many times I have seen some recommendations to play simply knight to f3, then d6, bishop to g after e3, bishop to g7, then maybe something like h3, castling, and then to build this London system structure with knight to d2, bishop to d3 and similar ideas. But in my opinion, this is a more positional approach to the game. I wanted to show you a more aggressive approach and a more tactical approach against the King's Indian. After the move g6 here, my recommendation is to play a very flexible knight to c3. And you can say again, nothing special with that move, Jozarov, what they're talking about, there's nothing special, you just played a knight out. But actually this is a great and flexible move, because there are now several ways how Black can counterplay this idea. We can play, for instance, the move d5 here from Black's perspective, but basically what we have reached is the barrier attack setup. So it's barrier attack structure. We can play now the move e3, knight to f3, knight to e5, h4, h5, and you can say now what to do. What will happen if I go now into the barrier attack? Don't worry, I've covered already the barrier attack from White's perspective in our London system series, so please check them out. So I have covered so far this structure. If this happens to you, no problem, you have, I think, 5 or 6 videos in the barrier attack here on my London system playlist. You can check them out in order to beat this structure. So there is also maybe an opportunity for Black to play something like c5, but again, my recommendation is to pass through. We have covered now recently the Benoni structures with the Veganian gambit and similar ideas, and I've covered also the kingside move order idea. If, for instance, Black plays the move d6, we're playing simply e4, bishop to b5, knight to f3, a4 and similar ideas. So you have also several videos how to beat the Benoni with the kingside move order. So whatever Black does here, I have covered this video, so you can check them out. So in my opinion, this is a great approach to play against the King's Indian ideas, because we're not going, as I said, into this passive and positional setups, knight to f3, as I said, and e3. It's nothing wrong with this line, but I think the game becomes really complicated. So we're playing bishop to h2, knight to d2, and then you are basically battling again for the e5 square. You're trying to make maybe a queenside attack with a4, a5. Okay, you can maybe use this approach, but I wanted to show really now this great 150 attack idea. So here, after the move knight to c3, most of the times Black will go bishop to g7, and now my recommendation is to play the move e4. So you see, if d6 happens, we can do the same. Nothing wrong with that. So if d6, again, we're playing e4, and e4 is now basically a 150 attack setup. What's the 150 attack? So as I said, d5 we have covered with our barrier attack. After c5 we have covered the kingside move order ideas with passing through d5 ideas. So we're starting now our 150 attack lesson. So e4, what's the idea about this move e4? We're trying now to play queen to d2, then if bishop to g7 happens, then bishop to h6, and then h4, h5, creating a flank attack, then to trade off the dark square bishops after black has castle, trying to deliver checkmate on the h-file with the queen and rook battery on the h-file. So that's our main goal. Not many games will end with the checkmate on the h-file, but it's the main strategical and tactical goal of white, and there's nothing that can be done so much, I think, when it comes to black's counterplay. So we're covering now the move bishop to g7, as said, d6 or bishop to g7, then, or maybe a different move order, but the same position will happen. We're playing simply the move e4. Now you see d6, and now we're playing the move queen to d2. Queen to d2, very, very important. There are now also ideas of knight to f3 immediately, but you could be vulnerable to some pinning ideas with bishop to g4. Then if you play queen to d2, then of course black could take here the knight on f3, and would that mess up your pawn structure? Of course, still you're continuing the game with the bishop pair, but what you don't have then afterwards is an attack on the g file. You don't have anymore the g pawn, and you would love, of course, to further attack the fianchetto with the g4, h4, h5. So when you take out, when you allow your opponent here bishop to g4 and then bishop takes f3, after g takes f3, you don't have anymore the opportunity to attack on the g file. Maybe the g file is open, you can use the rook in order to attack, but in my experience, I had several trouble when my opponent managed to take away the knight on f3. So that's why queen to d2 more flexible. It's a more flexible idea. Now bishop to g4 doesn't make sense, of course, because we're playing simply f3. It leaves us now a great flexibility in the game. We're waiting again what black is doing, and we haven't lost our 150 attack setup. We're playing, of course, queen to d2, and now we're threatening again this idea bishop to h6. So in this setup, I wanted to show you a great gameplay by Wei Ji against Wang Yongguo. Wei Ji, really a respected grandmaster here. After queen to d2, castling was played, queenside castling. We're trying now our 150 attack, bishop to h6, as we said, h4, h5, g4, similar ideas, just breaking the position on the king side, trying to trade off the dark square bishops, and then deliver checkmate on the h-file with the rook and queen battery. So in the game, knight to c6, and you see now this approach is very aggressive of blacks. If you play, for instance, knight to f3, it could lead now into complications after bishop to g4. You see, even if you try now this idea bishop to h6, bishop to f3 would happen. That's what I meant here. G takes f3, and now black could counterplay here with the great e5 move. You have already lost a little bit the battle in the center. The bishop is not so good. The light square bishop is blocked out by its own pawns. You could maybe counterplay here with bishop to b5, maybe attacking further the knight on c6, and then trade it off in order to battle maybe for the e5 score. But that actually would be very risky, because then after something like b takes c6, the b file could get also open. So black could have several good counterplays here on the b file. So that's why we're playing f3, and the potential e5 is not so good immediately. You see, you're vulnerable to some attacks here on the d file. So if here d takes e5 happens, there are now, after d takes e5, this ideas of course takes, and now after rook takes d8, knight takes d8, here's the problem. You will lose simply here the pawn on e5. So that's why it's not such a powerful idea here for black. So as I said, f3, we have still this great battery on the d file. In the game, black tried knight to h5, bishop to h6. We're simply continuing the attack. e5, knight to e2, bishop takes h6, queen to h6. This bishop takes h6, queen to h6 is a normal idea, because we want to deflect the queen a little bit from the defense here on the d file. We were trying now to counterplay somehow on the d file. In the game, e takes d4 was played, knight to d4, knight takes d4, rook to d4, and it seems so that black has defended, but actually still this is a very risky position. The bishops are off the board. In the 150 attack, our main goal is accomplished. I think we lost, we traded off the main defender of blacks here in front of the king. It was, of course, the dark square bishop. The dark square bishop also was the great attacker here on this long diagonal. So actually now from this point on, that's our cornerstone of the attack. We have, I think, a pleasant position. After move bishop to d7, you see now we have opportunities to play g4, knight to f6, h4, simply pushing forward. Here h5, bishop to e6, rook to d2, king to h8, and now queen to e3. Here, very important, rook battery. Now, as I said, we started with the main idea of the checkmate threat on the h-file, but basically the game always transposes into something else. Black first had to defend its position by moving many pawn moves, making many minor piece moves here. I think from this point on, again, white has a pleasant game. Rook to d8, queen to h6, again this battery, bishop to d3, king to h8, and now after e5 in this position, black resigned. It's really wild because if you take here, we simply take out here the pawn, and there are now several weaknesses here. Bishop takes g6 is also an opportunity. F takes g6, g5 is also very important here. You can try knight to h5, but now even bishop takes g6 is an opportunity. You see the knight is hanging. We have really a great battery on the h file. So let's go back. As said here, very important, we're playing the move knight to c3. As we said, d5 I have covered so far in the London system series with the move. After the move d5, we're going into the so-called Barry attack. After c5, we're going basically into the kingside move order with the move d5, then e4, and I think you can have a pleasant game against the Benoni. So let's see now another example of the 150 attack. Here it's a gameplay by Klaus Darga against Franz Kuipers. Here again, this idea, knight to d7. Now black is trying to counterplay here in the center, is trying finally to get this e5 move. Now we can play knight to f3. Knight to f3 is perfectly fine now because after the move knight to d7, black has lost here the possibility to play the move bishop to g4 and play this dangerous attack against your knight on f3, because the knight is now standing in the way. Now knight to f3 is perfectly fine because still we're preventing this idea of e5. So here after castling, again queenside castling, and you can be the judge of this position. Please tell me if you're satisfied now with the outcome of your attack. I don't think that with this idea knight to f3, then h3, bishop to h2, you gain so much here after the move queenside castling. In the game, black tried the move c6 because it's obvious that we have now the so-called opposite side attack game, where black is trying to attack the queen side, white is attacking the king side. With the move c6, black has now also the flexibility to push the pawn on b5. But now you see this is a passive move. We have immediately opportunities to play the move e5. That's the beauty of the 150 attack. We can attack the center, we can attack the king side, we can play some gambit lines, we can play even in some occasions even some g4, then sacrificing a pawn in order to open here the g file idea. So there are several great ways. This is only an introduction video. We'll cover now more and more the 150 attack. Here knight to e8 was played. We have now h4. Every time, but really every time, when you see the knight has left the defense of the h5, it's time simply to push. You don't lose time here. It's simply time to push the pawn on h4 immediately. In the game, queen to a5 was played, counter attack against the e5 pawn, but actually this e5 pawn doesn't matter anymore. Our main goal is simply to proceed with h5, because you can sacrifice really one pawn, because the knight, as we said, has left simply the defense of the h5. So it's simply now time to push. In the game, d takes e5, d takes e5, knight to e5, knight takes e5, bishop to e5, but no problem, we have lost the pawn, but don't panic. Here we have immediately opportunities to play here h takes g6. If bishop takes c3 happens, we can immediately take out, of course. First g takes h7, it comes with the check, and then for king to h8, queen to c3. From this point on, I think again white has a pleasant game. This bishop pair is simply too much to handle. Knight to f6 can be pinned. We can immediately use also bishop to d3, bishop to c4 ideas. We can have also this very cool move, rook to d8, pinning the bishop a little bit, never allow this bishop to move. So as said, it's really dangerous position. If knight to f6 for instance happens, we can immediately pin the knight with bishop to e5, and still black is simply strategically lost. We have an extra pawn, and of course the bishop, it's a much better position for white. So after the move h takes g6, black tried f takes g6, but now you see this bishop comes into the game, bishop to c4. If you would have taken here with the h pawn, Then bishop to e5 can happen. After queen to e5, rook to e1, kicking away the queen, and the queen is now a little bit stuck here. The queen has to move to g7, and now the pawn on e7 is hanging. If queen to f6 happens, then we have, of course, opportunities to play queen to h6 or knight to e4. These are the two main attacking possibilities. So again, I think black is simply strategically lost. We can use now every piece in the attack. It's simply a great attacking harmony with the minor pieces, with the rooks on the E and H file. It's a pleasant game. So after H takes G6, F takes G6 was played, bishop to C4, E6, you see bishop takes E5, queen to E5, and now this idea queen to H6. Here black tried a great move. I think it seems so like a great move because we're trading off the queens, but that's really the beauty now of the 150 attack. You see now, because of this passive play of blacks, white has the opportunity to play here an attack on the d file. Rook to d8, rook to c4 was played, rook takes e8, the king has to move. Now rook to e7, king to f6. Now you see this rook comes into the game. A very, really good move here. E5 here, black tried to liberate, finding this long diagonal for the bishop, but now we have the spin, king to g5, we have rook to e7, g3, and in this position black resigned. There is, of course, this serious threat of rook to c7, pinning the bishop and taking out the rook. So as we said, this is our cornerstone of the attack. So here, knight to c3. Many of you will see this recommendation to play knight to f3, then bishop to g7, e3, then maybe something like d6, h3, bishop to h2. So as we said, we're trying now to go into the 150 attack with a more flexible move, knight to c3, e4, queen to d2, when it's possible even to play the move knight to f3, h4, h5. This is the so-called 150 attack, and we're starting now with these ideas. So be prepared. This will be really wild and tactical, because the 150 attack I use myself in different lines, because I play e4, bishop to e3, but the ideas are similar, or in some occasions are even the same, because we're simply playing on this queen and bishop battery, trying to trade off the dark bishops and creating this very annoying attack on the h file. So okay, this is now our introduction video of the 150 attack. We're continuing now this setup. As we said, after the move d5, if black plays d5, you can check out my Barry attack videos against this setup, and after the move c5, you can check out my how to beat the Benoni videos. Basically, it's Benoni structures after the move c5 with the king side move order. Please check them out before we start to continue our London system series against these types of structures, so you can have a better preparation also in this ideas of black. So okay, if you want to see more about the London system, please check out my whole series from the beginning, from introduction video, part 1, part 2, part 3, and so on. And if you want to maybe study some openings for black, check out my hyper accelerated Dragon Sicilian defense series as a good response to e4, and also my King's Indian and Nimzo Indian defense series videos against as a response against the d4. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.